Yeah, cool.
There we go. So I just want to start some of that again, just so that you have this in the recording. So it's really connecting in relationally to where we are and where our client is, you know, where the thoughts, feelings, body, emotions, and sensations are. So we both land exactly where we are. Now, there's no right or wrong way of landing, but there is a landing in a space. And somehow when we acknowledge that landing, we bring more of ourselves, because we allow something that we might be holding at bay to actually come into the space together. And we bring a kind of wholeness. And then I talked about all the places, the beautiful places we know each other from. And that is a helping and an orientating a client. So one of the first things we do before hunger or thirst or anything like that is orientate ourselves, and that's a way to keep ourselves safe. So this is one of the parts of also establishing safety. We'll go into in more detail, but it's like where I am and where I know you from, so I can find my place here presently. So that's quite a beautiful kind of, it comes from systemic therapeutic training of like where I am now and how I'm related to you. And then the other parts that I'm going to bring now are also part of that orientation. So it's a bit of a structure about the training. And when we know where we are now, like how we've arrived and where we're going, that also increases our safety. So when we're kind of, someone just jumps in and runs off, we're constantly spending a lot of time trying to orientate as they're moving around to determine where they're going. Whereas if we do it for them right from the beginning, parts just settle, and then more can be shared, and there's more kind of ground underneath them. So in this beautiful training that we have together, we have 7 Zoom calls, 5 of which are modules, and I've added a 5th one to this particular training because it really felt like it's a really important part. And I was going to do it as a follow-on training, but I've decided I want this training to be everything in one place, that someone doesn't do this and then feel like they have to do something else afterwards. So now this is kind of like, it feels like this training's almost come into more wholeness in itself as well, which is kind of, yeah, so beautifully symbolic of kind of what we're doing for our clients is we're bringing them into wholeness when we are listening and intervening in this way that I talk about. And we will also have a Facebook group, which I've invited you into, and I see you've come into already. And so in there, I will put all the recordings, and I will also put, so I've done for this round, I've actually done a manual, because I think it's helpful when you leave to actually have something you can refer back to. You know, we listen in one way, so I encourage you here, maybe just listen and let everything land, and then you can go and listen to the recording with the manual there and then write any extra notes, because most of what I will say is sort of captured in point form there, and then you can add anything else when you listen the second time. And then there's also the Voxer, which I will open today, and that's yeah, open. There's no time limit or anything placed on that Voxer. You come in as often as you want. Now, because this is relationally based training, stuff can come up for you as well, and you go, oh, I noticed this. And this is why with this kind of training that I do, I also recommend that there's like a supervision attached at some point in time, or a practice attached at some point in time, because you know, life doesn't unfold like a textbook. We can learn all of these things, and then we meet a human being in their uniqueness, and then you're like, okay, you can pull in this and this and this and this. And that's why all therapists get supervision for until they've reached 700 hours, because there is so much complexity when we actually hold clients. And I think it would be something that really benefits the coaching world as well, for that supervision part to come in, which is both for us as we meet our clients, because as one of my friends said to me, she said, I can't do this work any longer because the people that come to me with the exact things I struggle with, and I can't bear it any longer. And I think that is mostly the experience of people. So the supervision is also like a beautiful space to come and process, so that when we're with our clients, we actually meet them unconditionally. Because one of the other parts of safety is being able to meet a client without judgment, to be non-directional in how we listen and intervene. And when we've got parts that are being activated, we can start doing what we think might be best for us rather than the client. And we start to speak from us rather than from a place of listening to them. So that's, yeah, that's the other element there. And yeah, so these parts all are profoundly important in kind of developing safety. So a lot of people will say, oh, my clients feel safe with them. But most clients have no experience of complete safety. They might feel slightly more safe with somebody than they do in other places. But to have this space that you provide, that someone can share absolutely anything without feeling that they're going to be judged or that they need to hold something back, is profoundly powerful. Most people will never have experienced that in their life. Most people have actually never even been really listened to properly in their life. And one of the things that really is important to safety is confidentiality. So I've had a lot of different experiences. So I come from a therapeutic world, and then I've found myself more in a coaching world that hasn't necessarily had a particular training attached to it and how to hold people. And I have been on a call with someone, and someone's just quickly taken a picture of me and then shared it on social media. And I was like, whoa, that's quite a thing to do for somebody without actually even asking. Other people have said, can I take this and put it somewhere else? And the thing is, for most people I've noticed, and I now don't even ask people. I've stopped asking people for reflections. I've stopped asking people if I can take things from one place to another more recently, because I notice each time I ask, there's just a slight something that happens for everybody. Because when we say something in one place, we know we've orientated ourselves in that place. So we know what it looks like when we say it. When someone says, I'm going to take those words and put them somewhere else, we don't know where they're going to put them. We haven't been able to orientate ourselves into that space. So something happens in us. And I think sometimes people speak less about someone because they're scared their words are then going to be taken from here and put somewhere else. So I think it actually stops something. It stops a celebration of people working with people. And I know a lot of people get consent, and I know a lot of people don't even get consent. Once it's in a public space, then I can share it publicly, is the perspective. And people also share a lot of, like, my client had this kind of success, and so that'll show other people that I can do what I say I can do. And it's like that social proof. And the thing is, that actually comes from a traumatized response when people buy from that place, because they're not listening to themselves. They're buying because it helped for somebody else, and it won't necessarily help them. You know, we're all profoundly different. We come from profoundly different trauma. And what happens when somebody shares somebody else's personal experience, that person may have been quite willing for it to be shared. They might have consented, but somebody else will go, I don't want what I say to be shared. So when they come into the space, they actually don't share as much. And I think that's one of the things that's preventing the healing in a lot of the coaching spaces, because people are holding a lot back, either because they don't feel safe in the group, because somebody's not going to listen, they're going to tell them what to do, which can be shaming, and they're scared that the coach or mentor, whoever's holding that group, may take their words and use them elsewhere. Or they might feel like they have to, because they really enjoy working with the coach, that they feel like they should be willing or say yes to sharing the words when actually they don't want to. So it's easy just not to speak. So, you know, these, you know, confidentiality, and I think at the beginning of a training, it's always useful to say exactly what your confidentiality means. And, you know, if I hold group therapeutic spaces, I'll actually get someone to sign something. It's not a contractual thing. It's just a real, like, thinking about, okay, this is what it means. I don't get to share other people's experience elsewhere or outside the group. I really hold it in here. So everything I say in this space, you can share. This is a training. You get to talk about it. You get to use it with your clients, whatever. But anything you share will be confidential and will never be shared outside of this group in any kind of way. I just want to check. I will check my notes occasionally because I want to make sure there's, you know, lots of different pieces that and the other thing is doing what we say we're going to do. So when we say this is how it's going to unfold, that we actually follow it. And if it's okay also if we don't follow it. So we say this is going to be the structure. They're going to be 5 modules. They're going to be 2 calls that are going to be integration. And if I change that because I need to in some kind of way, you need to go in and actually negotiate that with people, because otherwise it feels unsafe, because otherwise people go, well, what else is going to change? They said it was confidential. Maybe that'll change. You know, all these things happen subconsciously. Now, the other part of that is of safety is pacing. So, you know, how we really need to go at the speed of our clients. You know, we stop, we kind of go, they ask questions. You know, a lot of times, I don't know if you've noticed when you listen to somebody speak and they're speaking and then suddenly people start asking a lot of questions. What's happening is the pace is too fast and people are trying to slow them down. And you'll notice that in groups, people suddenly ask and they won't stop asking questions until their system kind of settles. So it's really trusting the pace of the person you're working with. And some clients can go deep fast, and other clients will deflect and do all sorts of things to kind of prevent it going. So I'm wondering, just, you know, we're talking about a bit how this is landing, what your sense is of safety, kind of any experiences you've had that have felt unsafe or haven't.
Yeah, I mean, I really like the way you're doing it already. And I feel like that whole words being shared is a biggie that I've been like dabbling with and then retreating from because it hasn't felt right.
Yeah.
And I have only ever shared when I have got consent, but even then, I know that when my words have been shared, even if they're anonymous, it's been like, oh, I know that the next thing I say could be shared. So it does. So yeah, I completely get that. And it has been something I've been thinking about in the past, but that's kind of, yeah, it's interesting because I've just done a period of like that hype. I feel like it's that hype, and then I've retracted from it because it just didn't feel like completely genuine for me, or sustainable, like to always have that thing to hype with. So I think, yeah, it just raises another question for me as to whether or not that's something I want to like continue, or just like you say, you just don't do it.
And I will be talking about it, and I think it's a beautiful thing to speak about, as well as your experience that you say here of like dabbling. How does it feel? What is influencing? Because I think it really needs to be spoken about more in the coaching industry, of like letting people actually trust rather, you know, there's an extreme that everyone says, you know, don't do, that's like pushy and in your face and like, you've got these issues, I'm going to fix it. And then there's a continuum of it, but it's still somewhere in the same sort of set. It's just a little bit more subtle of instead going, you know, does this feel right for you? Check in for yourself. Really know before you step into something whether this is what you want to do, because then at least when somebody lands, they can actually receive what you're bringing, and they're more likely to actually get the results because they are landing kind of connected to the person. So it does have a profound impact.
Yeah, completely.
One of the other things about pacing that a previous person raised was, she's like, what if the client is going really fast? And you can see that's not helpful. And you will see that as well. And you notice that. So some people will come in and just like speak and speak and speak. And it's like a wall of words. You almost can't get a word in edgeways. And that's when we'll talk about how to intervene then. But that's when they're kind of missing their own body's kind of pacing. They're kind of overriding it. A lot of people with trauma will talk quickly about a lot of abuse very quickly sometimes because they've learned to kind of cognitively process it and they haven't kind of somatically processed it. So they'll come in and tell you these horrific things like one after one, and they'll go, I'm okay saying it because I've processed it. If they had, they wouldn't speak like that. So they've processed it cognitively. So it's just like, just always keep an ear out for like if someone starts to rush, because what they're trying to do is rush through all these awful things to get them over and done with. And then, yeah, we need to intervene quite quickly. And just because then they feel shame afterwards, particularly in a group if they've come in to share and then they'll leave. So kind of support them to feel safe by intervening.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
I resonate with that. Processing logically, obviously.
Yeah.
And I also know what it means to somatically process it as well. So I think that's the beauty in it, isn't it?
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think anyone with trauma has had that experience of kind of just rushing through and telling that story. And then, yeah, as the more healing you do, you get to integrate those parts more. And from my experience, I know I share a lot less. Most people hear very little of my, exact trauma. It may come up, but then it's just a snippet here and there. It's not a list of everything. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what we're doing here is I'm not teaching you to be a therapist. I'm not teaching the people that come in here how to be a therapist. It's really bringing a therapeutic understanding to listening and to intervention to be able to support a deepening of a client's experience, to expand their awareness and to bring them into wholeness. So it's really integrating the body, the cognitive part, and the emotional part into one in a way that is not directional. So when I say that, it's really important because I think what can happen in a lot of places in the coaching world, we can kind of see where somebody struggles mostly. Most people, it's easier to see someone else's struggle than it is to see ours. And we can go, that's what the problem is. If I just highlight that problem for the person, it's all good. And not only does it shame them when we do that, but awareness is never expanded by somebody else telling us something. Awareness comes from an integrated part in our body, from somebody helping us explore the parts we've locked away, and then our awareness comes. And that just is, it develops internally ourselves. It doesn't need to be pointed out. So it's like never being directional in how we kind of take a client somewhere. And also finding that ground of unconditional love. So it's like when we can actually be with whatever they bring. And now that can be profoundly hard. I've worked with parents who go, well, I think a child does deserve a good smacking every now and then. Now that's profoundly different from my values. And to try and then respond to that person from a place of unconditional love requires a fair amount of work on my part in order to do that. And people will come and say things like, I think, what's happening in Gaza is like overrated. I think the Palestinians are making a big fuss or something, which can be, especially if you're holding a group space, to be able to find your ground, because you're finding your ground, not just for that person, but for everybody else to find their ground, because they're possibly also going, what the hell kind of thing. So it's not to say what they're saying is okay, but to find an unconditional space in which to be able to lovingly respond to them, which may be, I hear that's very juicy, that as a part of parenting. In this place, we hold this value of parenting, and there are lots of places that hold that value, and you can stay and learn about this way, or you may find it more useful to leave, kind of thing. So it's not, you know, making them okay that they get to stay, but just finding your ground to navigate where is the best way forward. Is it that they leave? Is it that they stay? What does it look like? How does it feel for the rest of the group? Now, that's quite a complicated navigation for the rest of the group, but I imagine you would be able to hold that. But it requires something quite solid in ourselves, not to get pulled too much by other people's emotions.
Yeah. It's funny, actually, I was in a group situation not so long ago where someone was very angry because she said, I feel very triggered right now. And I actually thought how the coach handled it was very, very good. Like, it was really good. And I was thinking, God, how would I cope with that? But I also trust that I would be able to. But yeah, it was fascinating to watch it unfold.
Yeah, sometimes we can get activated because we've watched so many people hold those situations badly. Like it's a bit of like, ooh, this could go either way. Could be very nasty to witness. So some of that anxiety is actually just a human anxiety of like, we watch so many people handle so many things so badly at a political level that, everyone kind of like, oh, which way is this going to go? And somehow when we're in the place of holding, we have a different level of power to hold the group than if we're the person listening. And that can actually be quite uncomfortable when something like that happens, because we know we can't navigate it necessarily into a place that is supportive and holding and listening. Because holding somebody who's very activated can be quite challenging, particularly if they're activated with the person speaking. To hold somebody who gets very angry with you and thinks you've done something wrong or something can be a big thing to hold as well. And also knowing in those moments, a lot of when people get activated, it possibly isn't something that's happening in the room directly or between you. It's possibly something looks similar enough, and that similar enough is where that activation takes place.
Yeah.
So I love, I just wanted to tell you a little bit of a story just to give you a sense of like how we're going to be listening and looking at it, because a lot of people go, oh, I listen really well. It's like we hear the other person really well, because that is active listening. And that is a part of what I'm talking about here, is like we're engaged, we're listening, we're right there with the person. Is that I went to somebody and he wanted to refer me on, and he said, I want to first meet you and ask you a few questions. And I went, yeah, that's fine. And so he said, okay, I do body work and role things. So if you were to walk in the door, I'd notice like if you had a bit of a limp or something that maybe your leg was misaligned, I'd need to work here and here. And he said, so how do you know where to go with a client? And I went, well, first of all, I never diagnose a client because I see human beings as incredibly complex. And while we might see something first up, that is just information that I then file. And what I'm doing is just taking information in. And I'm always staying with the client exactly where they are. And I think that is like the most important thing of any listening, is stay with what is for a client. And that can sound like really, really simple, but it actually is profoundly complex, because we go in places where we think might be useful, or the client goes in a different place and we try and bring them back, or instead of just following their process and what they're talking about, because their body knows exactly where they need to go. So I said to him, I'm not kind of directional. I trust they will take me on the journey, and I'm noticing everything. So I said to him, I noticed when I shook your hand, whether it was tight, what it was like, whether you looked in my eyes, whether you looked in my eyes and then turned away. When you sat down, I noticed whether you sat at the front of the seat or the back of the seat. I then noticed whether you leaned forward or back, whether you looked me in the eye when you spoke to me. So I've just, all of that is just information you just take in to notice what's happening for your client without any judgment. It doesn't, whether he sits at the front or the back doesn't mean anything to me. I just notice he's doing it. Whether he looks me in the eye, and eventually down the track, I will go, when he looks me in the eye and then suddenly looks away, I'll go, I'm curious about that moment, because something changed in that moment. So that holding that curiosity is like to notice then when something shifts, when somebody's leaning forward for 15 minutes and suddenly they lean back and do that, then you go, something happened then, because you've learned to watch with such detail to what's happening for somebody. Yeah. I'm wondering, yeah, how that sounds, because I know for a lot of, he looked at me like, whoa, I judged him, and I said to him, actually, it doesn't make any difference to me. I'm not, whether you do, and that's why I always start with, I'm not diagnosing somebody. It doesn't, like, you sit here, that means, you know, you're more this, you look here, it means you're more this. And those things all do mean something, but as soon as we pathologize any of that, we are making parts of that person wrong, rather than just seeing them for the human that they are alongside us.
Yeah, it's funny because it comes, like, where I go back to is like the NLP training that I had in terms of like the mirroring or the, I never really gelled with my NLP training and don't practice it. There was bits that I took from it that have stuck, but it is almost like that. You're watching and you're paying attention so that you can then do something, which is not what we're saying here.
No, exactly. And I think, you know, there's a natural mirroring that can happen when people are connected with one another. But when we try and force it, I really believe that we actually pick up something inauthentic when somebody mirrors us and we don't feel that depth of mirroring in their actual body, that we then go, because I know when people have used NLP in political situations with me, when they're lobbying me, and it's always been a bit, oh, you know, you can see what somebody's doing most of the time. I imagine the better you get at it, the more subtle it might be. But yeah, I think we know when somebody's with us in that moment. And in that moment, like genuinely there, unconditional, connected. And that is what makes safety, kind of thing, as well. You know, when coaches are being directional and they're like, yeah, well, if you're people pleasing, then you're this, this, and this. Immediately, we don't feel safe. Immediately. So they can say the space is as safe as they want, but that actually, the person doesn't feel safe when that happens. If we shame somebody at any point, and you may find you shame somebody at a point, because what often happens with listening, what happens when we go, I want it to be profoundly safe, I want this to be a listening space, is the opposite often shows up. And that's so uncomfortable. So no matter how well you want to do one thing, the opposite will often show up, either for what we do and we can somehow not listen. I can somehow suddenly be directional. But if we are following our process as well as our clients, I will notice when I'm directional, I'll notice a change in them, and that will go, I can then go, what happened in that moment? Was it me or was it them? And then I go, actually, I was being directional then. And I can then say to them, hang on a moment, I just need to take a moment and go back, because I have a sense I said something which I know was directional. I know, try to get you to do something. And I know, say, for example, you have been made wrong for everything that you do, so that when I make something wrong and say you should do it differently, it's like I'm then the person that hurt you. And I went, I'm so sorry, and take full responsibility and say to the client, I know you can do this. That was on me, that part. And they may go, no, it's fine, you're so lovely and blah, blah, blah. But don't let that don't go, oh, then that's fine. Just go, no, I'm really sorry I did that, so that they can actually receive it. So what we're doing is rupture and repair there. So they've never had someone take responsibility. So when we make mistakes, It's absolutely okay, because we get to take responsibility for them, and they get to have the first person ever kind of go, I'm so sorry, I did that again. So when that opposite of what we're trying to do shows up, it's also an opportunity. It's not something we need to beat ourselves up and go, oh God, I did it. Although I can sometimes do that to myself. It's more helpful for the client if we go, I'm really sorry.
Mm-hmm. And can I, so something's just coming up in
Yeah.
my head around not being directional. So let's just say we're in a one-to-one conversation, and they're coming to the table with, I'm struggling to speak up in this meeting or whatever it is. And so we're talking in that moment that we're listening, that we're not being directional in any sense. It is just listening. Is that what you're talking about? It's not that, like, because I guess as a coach, at what point is it okay to give direction?
So what I would say is listen first, because the only way what you're going to advise them to do will land is if you've listened first. It won't land otherwise, because there's something in the way that is actually stopping them. So every time a client comes to you and says, how do I do this? What they're actually saying, it's like it almost needs to be a mantra. What they're saying is, listen to how much this hurts that I can't do this. And then tell me how to do it. And you will find that as you work, it'll be different with different clients, but you will find when something starts to settle in them, that you can then start to talk about how to do it. People come to me as parents and go, my child won't sleep, tell me how to make my child sleep. And if I just give them the solution, they will never, ever do it, even though the solution will work. They first have to listen to all the feelings they have trying to put their child to sleep, all the missed time they have, like with their partner, all of that. Yeah, how does that sound?
Yeah, no, it's perfect. And it is like, that's genius in terms of, like, if they're saying, how do I do this, what they really mean. It's like when I'm saying, like, how do I lose weight? I want to just talk about how my relationship with food is like complex and all this, that, and the other. So I get that as well. Because I know I kind of know how I get to do it. It's just, it's hard. So it's just in this listening piece, we are non-directional. I can, that's easy. Yeah.
And you said something, I get that. You said something very beautiful there. When I've had someone listen to me, I know what to do. It's just hard. So that's the other listening piece. It's like, here's the solution, but what is it like to actually do it? Because to actually, most people, people will say to me, you just need to share your voice more. Your voice is so beautiful. Go share your voice more. But I'm absolutely terrified of sharing my voice. So I know it's the solution, but that doesn't get me anywhere. But if someone actually were to take the time to listen how hard it is to share my voice, I might actually be able to share my voice more. But I have yet to meet a coach that has had that capacity, which is why I've got a therapist now as a business mentor, so that they know that bit, because it's so important. And I think that's why most people will go, I've gone and spent zillions of dollars or pounds or whatever currency, and I've had no result, because these bits are not properly integrated into coaching. And I think if they are, people will have mind-blowing results.
Okay, cool.
So the other part, we're still on like the setting up of the space and the structure and everything. So the other part, and I know you've heard me talk about this before, is like beginnings and endings. So they sit on a continuum. So for something to begin, something needs to have ended. And so that can be quite subtle. And so even for you to come in here something ended in order for this to begin. And, you know, it's easier to look at it like a relationship, one ends, another begins, but it's happening all the time with everything. So in order for a client to stop doing something and start doing something else, something needs to end for something to begin. So we talk about that and we'll do it a little bit more, is like unfinished business and how that completes. And that's an ending, and then something can begin. And when that doesn't complete, something new can't begin from that place. So it's really important when a client comes to you and goes, I want to know how to do this, that you complete that ending in order for them to then start something else, that new beginning. And it's only when that really completes, more can begin. Now, it doesn't have to complete like 100%. We can do like 20% and then a little bit more can begin, and we complete more and then a little bit more can begin. So it's like, you know, it's flowing the whole time. But that completion allows a beginning. So these moments when you start anything with a client are like really powerful moments, because beginnings will be touched. So every time we begin anything, we kind of, a whole lot of pieces get touched. So we will touch on places when somebody was born, their first day at school, their first day at a job. All of these get touched with every beginning and every ending as well. So some clients, you probably find as well, struggle to leave a call. They just, or they'll bring a real clangor of something, like they'll drop something, a really traumatizing event, like 2 minutes before the call ends, because knowing most people won't have the capacity to go, we're still going to have to end, because it's ending for them is hard. So what you can say is, I think it might be useful when we begin next time to actually talk about how we end, how to support you ending, so that they feel safe to say goodbye, because that'll heal something for them. And then, you know, you don't have this experience of someone never wanting to leave as well. And you'll find, you know, over time as well. So for some clients, I'll let them go over. And for other clients, I won't let them go over at all. Because for the person who struggles with endings terribly, I will actually hold it quite firmly, because they're getting to heal when I hold it quite firmly. When somebody else has a feeling, you know, no one ever cares and it's always giving them less than they really need, I might soften that ending a little bit, so they get to have that experience of, actually, someone does care enough for me to finish those last few sentences. And that's not like giving them another 15 minutes or something. It's just giving them a little bit more time to kind of come to that natural end. What else do I want to say? Yeah, I think, yeah, maybe even it's quite a useful thing to just think of how we begin. Because I think, and the more we explore how we begin, the more kind of we have a sense of what other people might be experiencing. So I know when I begin, I will go into space, I will be very quiet. I will watch on the outside to make sure I'm safe, and I won't say anything until a lot of other people have spoken, because then I know that I'm going to be okay, that they're saying the same kind of things, that what I say will be received. And I mostly lose contact more with my own somatic experience, because when I'm beginning, I'm actually watching on the outside so closely to see what's happening. So I know when I go into spaces now, I need to check on my own somatic experience. So, you know, you can bring in these things, the more you know of like the things that can stir up for you and for other people, then you can say, you know, just let's check into our bodies here. What's happening? You can do the things that support you in beginnings, and other people who may leave their somatic experience, you ground them, and you just can tend to some of the things that come up. You know, when you open a Facebook group and you say, come and introduce yourself, some people will leap in and other people will not. All of that is information about that person, whether they do it whether they might say, oh, I'm too busy, but we never do something for no reason at all. There's always a reason we do everything. So all of that is like information that you have, like what might be needed, how do I attend to this process, does this person need a bit more safety, we can say something here, or you can share, you can write something yourself, or you can share in the group, just giving them different ways that they can feel safe and still be connected to the process that's unfolding. Just gonna reposition my chair. Suddenly. So we're just checking in, asking some people as they begin, how they feel, what their experience is like, what beginnings are like for them, any parts. Often when you say to someone, when we begin here, there's a similar feeling from big beginnings, or when we end, the endings are equally important, and most people don't tend to endings because most people have had an abandoning experience in their life of some sort or another, being left at school, being left with a grandparent they didn't like, all sorts of things, being left in a nursery when they needed their mother. So abandonment is a huge thing in the world. So endings are very important. What's it like to have got really close to a group, have shared so much, and now to know you may not be in contact with these people any longer, what comes up? And often endings, because more safety has been established, people are probably more willing to come in and kind of really touch on those places.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I encourage you can share here or write, whatever feels more comfortable for you.
Yeah, I just had a one-to-one client finish, and it's interesting because she, I think, would continue on the basis that we have gotten into, which was she'll come back and say, right, can we have a session? And then she'll pay me, and then she'll drag it out because she's traveling and she won't be able, she'll put off her last session for sometimes months. This one was months, this last one. So we did have a conversation about like kind of closing off the initial intention that we had around getting together, because it's been 2.5 years. And she even still said, but I will be back. And I was like, and that's absolutely fine. You come back anytime. But like, it was interesting, and I wonder how, like in 7 weeks' time, how I might alter like how I closed it off, essentially, because it was where I felt like there was a mutual need to do it, but I had to lead that conversation, which I did, and she was fine with it. But yeah, it'll be interesting to have that in the back of my mind as I move through this, in terms of like what I might do differently, if anything.
Yeah, I've also had an experience a couple of times with clients who can't end. So that's too painful to end. So that last session is something that they just keep in their pocket. But what happens is they never get to heal that ending. And, with you being so beautiful and compassionate, how amazing to have an ending that's a healthy ending with someone like you. And of course, yes, they get to come back, but that session can't be dragged on. Like you can say next time, okay, I just noticed that our endings can be hard, and you can attend to that right at the beginning, and go, this is how I suggest we end, because I think it might be important for a whole lot of reasons. Because then we really can hold how hard it is to end. Because endings are big, can be really, really big. And she may not, some clients will come back to me 3 years later and go, oh my God, if you hadn't held that ending, I would never have healed that part. And I didn't fully heal it even while I was with you. It took a while for it to integrate what you had done and how you had spoken about it. So someone might not even feel it immediately, but it's very powerful work because I imagine she will be back, particularly because that there isn't an ending. So she's like, she will be seeking to come back. And then so you get to have another opportunity, another go each time you get to practice.
Yeah. And actually, I've just closed off my playground group,
Yes,
which we've been together for 2.5 years as well. And that was beautiful because I wanted to get us together and they were up for it as well. And we just had like less than an hour just chatting to each other, and just like the things they said to each other about how like the support had impacted them, and then they talked about like the ripple effect of the work they've been doing, and it was just so beautiful, and we all like got a bit teary and welled up and stuff, and it was just really beautiful. And it was something I didn't like. It was I felt like it was coming to a close, and then one was drifting off and not really engaging, and then the other one said, I feel like I'm done, even though I don't want to
leave.
So it was really beautiful how it happened, actually. So yeah. But
and
again,
I
I'm
think you
sure
bring in something so beautiful there, is like they get a reflection from each other, so that there's like a whole other level of kind of wonderfulness that comes in when you end like you did, that sometimes you don't even imagine. Kind of when you tend to endings like you did, you just never know all the beautiful parts that come in.
And then I think that also comes from being like, I'm very much like, this isn't the end, because like you're still like friends and all this. And I think that does come from the hurt that I've had being in containers where, you know, you're hyped up while you're there, and then
you're kind of tossed out.
Yeah. And it's like that's traumatic. And I never want anyone to feel like that. So I'm sure potentially that's happened, but I don't know.
Yeah.
I try to make that happen. So yeah.
And it is, what you're doing is tending to, like, this is space is ending where it's like this, and a new space is beginning where it'll be like this. You know, we'll see each other and in this space, and it'll be different, but it's not, you know, a disappearing. It's an ending of this container kind of thing. And I think that's another thing that is deeply damaging, is that endings are not held in most coaching places that I've seen, in any kind of sense, really. There's like quite a quick, it's a program, teach it, it's like, yay, it's done, let's celebrate. But it's not like touches a whole lot of parts kind of thing. It's not a tender touching into. So I love that you're doing that. I'm just checking how you're going. Do you need a bit of a stretch? Do you need to move around? We've kind of...
No, I'm all right. I'm good.
You're good? Okay.
Yeah.
The flow of information coming.
It's good. No, I like it. It's really good. I wasn't sure what to expect, so
yeah.
Good.
Okay. So I'm going to do a little bit on trauma, because there's the trauma mentor class there, and also you've done a bit, but just touch on these core kind of pieces of like, so often, you know, trauma's talked about as though it's flight, fight, freeze, fawn kind of response. And that's like quite a crude description of trauma. Yes, we can do them, but trauma is far more complex kind of thing. It influences the patterns and processes. It can actually look like personality in the end. But often when we see somebody and they go, that's just how I am, it isn't actually just how they are. It's what they've learned to do in order to keep themselves safe. And a lot of times when you hear someone say, that's just how I am, you know, when we are just who we are, there's an aliveness in that, and a kind of a really being present when there's a kind of leave that alone. It's just who I am kind of thing. It's like I'm protecting myself. I'm actually not letting you in. And it can be something you can just hold in your back of your head of like, there might be something there that we might need to look at. It's just, that's also that little bit of information and filing. So you know how I talk about, you know, when trauma happens, those parts get cocooned away. Those get fragmented, and as soon as we have those fragmented parts, we can't be ourselves fully in the moment. We can't be present, which is why, you know, there's so many trainings on presence, but people really struggle. Even if I say, let's check in our bodies, if I do that for a long period of time, people will be out of there. They'll log off, they'll go and do something else and go, that's not important. But that is that when we can't do that, what it's saying is they are cocooned, difficult paths. Now I have them, everybody does. It's like I've seen one enlightened human being in my life that has actually processed everything. And when you meet people like that, or a person like that, it's just like spaciousness. You don't have like, you can feel there's just nothing there. So everyone can say, oh, you know, I'm here and I've done it all and finished it all, but I haven't met. I don't have a sense when that's happened that that's actually true. There is more, there is complexity. And when we really acknowledge that in ourselves and are willing to be vulnerable and share that, it allows other people to go, actually, I have parts that are hard. And so what happens when we're working with clients is they are responding from the past the whole time, because those cocooned young parts, those unfinished parts, that unfinished business is informing the present moment constantly. So they will say, I don't know if I have the right partner. I don't know if I'm in the right job. I don't know, you know, my children are too much for me. I'm not good enough mother. All of these things is because the past's actually informing the present moment. And you can't know if it's the right job or the right partner or something's happening with their parenting until parts heal. And then when they heal, then you can go, what is the past and what is the present? Is this partner just activating something in the past by something, he's not beating his wife, but he might raise his voice slightly, and the wife feels like she's being beaten because she has that experience. So she then goes, it's my husband, I'll get rid of my husband and it'll all be okay. But it's actually that pain, that unhealed part in them. So it's complicated, I would imagine, when a client comes to you and goes, like, my business is all wrong, or I can't work in this company because this is happening. But there's some complexity happening there that often needs to be understood before a decision can be made of like, is this right or is this wrong? So when clients come to me, a lot of coaches will just go, just leave him. If you're not feeling wonderful and this all the time, just leave him. It's not right. But I'm actually always trying to hold the family system together and see if we can heal, and then it starts to function more. So when you listen, it's not about saying, oh, you've got a shitty boss kind of thing, but it's just like, I hear that when this happens with your boss, that's really painful, because that's actually listening to the person, because you're listening to the pain. When we say, oh, you've got a shitty boss, we're kind of colluding with them.
Yeah.
And it never gets to the pain. So if somebody goes, oh, my husband did this or did that. Now, I won't, if someone is unsafe, if someone's being sexually abused by their boss, then you give very different advice. So sometimes it's practical and sometimes it's listening. You're like, you go to HR, you report it, kind of thing. That's illegal. It's abusive, that languaging. If someone hits their wife, I'm like, that's it. Kind of thing. We need to find you a safe place to live. You'll mostly find someone won't leave an abusive partner, so you have to do the listening stuff anyway. But you come in with like a lot more practical solutions if something is unsafe. So it's like, yeah, and you'll know that, where something is wrong and when it isn't, and when you give practical advice and when you listen. And yeah, the other part is that you will see a lot of themes. A lot of themes get talked about in the coaching industry of like not being enough, people pleasing, and what coaches will often do is extrapolate and say, while you feel enough, your business won't work. While you don't feel enough, your partnership won't work. Go and heal it all by yourself, and then that'll work. Fix yourself first. And that misses the complexity of the relationship. It misses the complexity of the trauma. And the thing is, the root cause of all of those themes can actually be profoundly different. So unless we actually meet the person in their uniqueness, we miss what is the root cause. So when we're going to do all these ways to kind of expand awareness and deepen awareness, then we find out what the root cause is. So, and then the people-pleasing ends. And people-pleasing is because a child mostly was taught that they had to look after others before they could look after themselves. Mostly there was an adult there that needed to be parented, needed to be cared for, didn't have the capacity to be a parent. And not always, there can be different reasons for that as well. Sometimes a parent will only celebrate the time a child did something for them, so they learn to do it for others. So you need to be, some people say, oh, well, it comes from here, and it doesn't always. So when we say to a client, oh, well, that would come from here for you, and they go, does it? I don't know. It's also not expanding their own awareness. You're telling them something, which, as we said, you know, we're never trying to do. We're trying to bring it from within them. And we'll talk about how to do this in that. What else? So, you know, we see, just to take a step back, it's like a lot of people will say, and I've seen people say, oh, you know, don't make such a fuss about trauma. It's not such a big thing. Only some people have trauma. Just shake yourself, get up, listen to your emotions, move on. But when we look at the world, we have an idea of how much trauma there is. When we see this dualistic perspective of right and wrong, that's when we know that there's trauma there. When someone says, when there's a pro or anti-vax debate, when there's a pro-Gaza or anti, you know, whatever it is, there are so many of these debates, and there's nothing in the middle. And that's because both are responding from a traumatized place. And when this healing happens, then the complexity of the conversation comes in. You know, when we see wars unfolding because a generation that was gassed, that have had people tortured, that were killed, and then the next generation that felt that loss didn't heal, what they do is repeat it. And it happens at a global level. It happens if a parent was smacked and doesn't integrate what happened and the pain of being smacked, they will smack their child and go say things like, well, I turned out okay, even though they're highly traumatized individuals. All of these things show us how much trauma there is. So every client that comes to you will have trauma, and just at a varying level, whether it's their personal trauma, whether it's their lineage trauma, or whether it's the collective trauma they bump into. And people sometimes say, what do you mean by collective trauma? So these are the structures that have been established by traumatized people. This is our judicial system. This is our tax system. This is our schooling system that has no kind of real deep compassion or understanding of trauma in it, because it's been developed by traumatized people who have tried to fix something rather than understand where something comes from. You know, war is another result of it. So there's like, yeah.
Sorry.
No.
I was going to say, would the patriarchal corporate be a system in itself that, brings the same?
Absolutely. Yeah. Where, you know, that women are then, so women will come to you having bumped into this on a daily basis, and it has an impact over time, going to work every day and coming into contact with a traumatized system. So when we understand, when somebody comes to us, the parts that they are holding, then we can go, you know, when they go, oh, my boss, then you go, you're also bumping into collective trauma repeatedly. It's your boss and, you know, the system that you're bumping into.
Yeah.
And when we acknowledge these parts, we shuffle again, close the curtain, that there's a tiny little sliver, and the sun's kind of just making its way through. Yeah. And the thing is, as well as what I was saying a little bit, is when we don't tend to these parts, when there is a little bit, like, say somebody comes to you and works with you, and we don't tend to something that happens with them, and there is unfinished business, they will not come back as well. So if we do something and we don't tend properly to it, so like, say, what do I want to say? So say you're in a group and you ask the coach a question because they said, you know, do this project and then come to me and then I'll give you feedback or something. So you do the project, come to them, and they never give feedback. And somebody may remind them or something and they still don't. And then that then is unfinished business. Somebody's paid for something and they didn't receive something and it's unfinished. So then every time somebody then emails them and says, hey, do you want to join my next program? That unfinished business gets touched. So that is what is happening for a lot of people, is like the past gets mirrored in the present moment. So suddenly I feel uncomfortable and irritated. And it's because somebody emailed me and reminded me of the past, of that unfinished business. So that's what's happening with clients, that mirroring process of the past, is everything that's unfinished is constantly gets brought into the present moment, whether it's a mirroring between us, between their boss, their partner, their business. That's why, you know, running a business, it touches every unhealed place in us perpetually, which is why, depending on how complex your trauma is, depends on how long it actually takes you for your business to actually feel enjoyable, rather than this thing that just pokes you perpetually, kind of touching all the places you need to heal. And it's the same as in a relationship. It depends on the type of trauma. As a parent, it depends on the type of trauma. These places get touched repeatedly as to whether some people go, will my relationship ever feel good? Will my business ever feel good? Will it always be hard? And it just depends on how much is getting touched. Is there anything else on trauma that you would like to talk about? We're going to change gears a little bit after this, just to do the first theme of listening, of actually starting to listen.
No, I started on the trauma class again, and I was like, yeah, I've taken notes this time because I do remember a lot of it. So I feel pretty good with that, especially all the work we've been doing. But
you've heard me speak a bit. I don't know what.
Yeah, no, I love it though, because
detailed.
I hear it. I hear it differently. Well, it lands differently every time, right? So
yeah. And that's my experience. I train with the same people again and again, and he's basically saying a lot of the same things, but it lands differently when my own understanding changes. It lands differently rather than he's changing his words, kind of, because I have got a more complex understanding of people, which I think happens with our own healing. As we do it, we just like that more capacity comes, the more we heal. So now we're going to talk a little bit, that was sort of really setting the ground for this training, to talk about one of the aspects of listening, and that is curiosity. So it's active curiosity. So it's a type of curiosity, and just, you can practice it if you've got any friends or any spaces that you can start to kind of practice, because I think the more you put what I'm saying into practice, the more it just builds on itself. So all of these things that I talk about actually all belong together, but I've teased them apart so that it's easier to go, okay, let's just focus on this piece first and I can do it. And a lot of these pieces you will do already, but when they all come together, there's something quite rich in how we listen and how we intervene and how we deepen awareness. So when we're listening with active curiosity, we are listening with a curiosity to bring in more awareness with our client. We are listening in a way that we're asking questions that they might never have thought of the answer, because that is held out of their awareness. So we are kind of curious about their process. So when I listen, curious about what is happening. So a lot of what I'm teaching is not content-based, it's process-based. Now you can work to listen with people either way and you'll mostly get to the same place, but I find it so much more useful when it's process-based because we're watching what somebody does, because everybody has very particular patterns and processes, and we can get to these, in my mind, a little bit more easily when we understand their connection with trauma. So when we're asking questions, it's not just about the content, it's often about what somebody's doing. And so it's like that moment when somebody is talking to you and then suddenly they go quiet and then they carry on talking and you're like, curious what happened there. It looked like you went into your head for a moment, because that's a little bit that they did. And then for some reason, they've decided not to include it. And then that curiosity of like, what happened there? And then they go, oh, yeah, I was going to say it. And then I have just this. And then you can carry on. It's like, oh, I wonder whether you'd like to bring that in or more of that. And then as they speak, it's like, I'm curious about that part. You know, they start to talk about their boss or something they're struggling with at work. And they give you just like a quick, oh, it's just like this. And then you're like, I wonder if you'd like to tell me a little bit more. It really, so it's like standing in that curious place of like wanting to know more and also wanting to really understand. So often we can like want to understand so someone feels understood, but often we don't understand completely. And it's better, the person actually feels more listened to if we ask a question in that moment than if we go, yeah, I know what you mean. Because part of them might actually even go, wonder whether you do. Whereas when we ask a question, then you go, they've let me explain, they now really get it. And that builds safety as well when you do something like that with somebody. You know, now it's not the Spanish Inquisition. It's not like, I don't, you know, what's happening? I don't know. It's like, yeah, the curiosity is kind of not too many questions, because if it's just questions, the person will quickly feel overwhelmed and can feel re-traumatized, because it's like it starts to feel invasive. So it's just learning to, and you'll find the pacing, and that pacing curiously will be different with each person. Some people can tolerate a lot more and some people can't tolerate much. And the more sensitive somebody is, the less they can tolerate before it becomes like, no. And you'll notice somebody will back off a bit if it's too much or something. And then when you stay with what is, as they back off when you've asked too much, you're like, have I asked too much? And they're like, oh, yes, it reminds me of my mum. She always asked too many questions. And then you go, kind of thing. Oh, do you want to say more about that? And then they go there. So you're staying with what is all the time and just tracking with them and their process. And yeah, so it's really that place of being with them in the here and now, in that present moment, whatever is showing up for them, and being curious about that present moment and what it looks like and what their process looks like. So even if I had been working with you at the beginning, you said, I'm tired, but that's okay. I would have gone, oh, because it sounded a bit like, yeah, let's just put that aside. And, you know, we're coming into a training place, so that's a very, you know, normal thing to have done. And if somebody's coming into a therapeutic place, then you get to hold that differently. And then you could go, yeah, there's some parts that need to be included in order for us to be here. I wonder if there are any parts that you might want to bring, or talk about being tired a bit more, or just so that, yeah, a bit curious about the tiredness. Is it, because the tiredness can, I'm not talking about yours now, the tiredness can be about lots of different things. The tiredness can be about a beginning, but beginnings are hard. The tiredness can be about something really big emotional that's happened and needs to be spoken about. It's not always necessarily lack of sleep. So it's just that curiosity about every part that someone's bringing. So we're asking those curiosity questions are deepening questions. It's never say, why do you think that happened? Because if we say, why do you think that happened? Take someone into their head, becomes cognitive, and they cut off from their emotional perspective. And often someone will just say to you, I don't know, kind of thing. And then it's hard to kind of pick up from there. And they're never like questions that can be answered with a yes or a no. It's always process driven, deepening questions, and expanding. What we're looking at is actually expanding their awareness of their experience.
Yeah. And like you demonstrate this on the invitation calls. So I have that, I've been on the receiving end of it, which makes it like, I think if I was learning this without having that experience of it, I might be thinking too much about what that looked like. But I think I've obviously had a beautiful example and been on the receiving end of it. So that's super helpful as well.
Yeah, no, I think it is. To have been listened to, it lands differently. And my mentor and I discussed whether I would give people one-off sessions while here, so they got that experience. And then it was like taking somebody out of a group into a personal space, and then other people don't know what's been spoken about. So we decided not to, but it is such a important part to have a sense of having worked with somebody, even if it's not me, of somebody else, and go, oh no, I kind of see what they were doing. I have like a felt sense of some of this information, that it doesn't just get to be theoretical. No. Just want to check. I think I have said, oh, that's the other part I wanted to talk about. So one of the things that can be really useful is to notice what makes you more curious and less curious. So sometimes we move towards somebody with a level of curiosity, and other times we back away from them and can become more judgmental. And there be a variety of different things. And of course, we're human, we move between that, but it's a curious thing to actually notice for yourself the people that you want to know more about, and the people that you like, no, I don't want to know anything about you. And just notice when you go through social media, when you talk to people, because clients will come to you and, as I said at the beginning, say some quite confronting things, and our curiosity can then, so a parent can say, well, I think it's okay to smack children. And when I'm curious, I can hold that I profoundly and fundamentally disagree with that. And I can still meet her with unconditional love and say to her, I'm curious what your experience was like when you were little, were you smacked? And that will depend on her capacity, whether she has a capacity to go there or not. And if she does, we can then go down that path. And I might even step back a bit, because if she's that determined to it, it's just like, we can say it more at a little bit of a distance. It's like, yeah, I'm wondering, if you've witnessed other children. Just let me think. I would step back a bit. No, I think actually that's what I would do. I don't think there is a way of stepping back from that one at all, but I think at times you will notice there's a way you can go a bit deeper, and there's a way you can, depending on how much that person's pushing you away. Because that person would be pushing away so much that if you say, have you witnessed other people being smacked, they probably would still be okay with that. But somebody who's opposed to a war happening to them might be able to step into a place of being empathetic in a war that's not connected to them, and then step into a place of empathy. So you can then take it to a scenario that's not connected to them, where they'll feel empathy, but you can only judge that depending on that person and how they come in. A really pro-guns lobby person is not going to have empathy for anything. They become completely disconnected from themselves. So, no amount of curiosity is going to help that person until they've kind of done a lot of work even to get anywhere. They've now become so highly defensive and aggressive that something needs to, a huge amount of work needs to be done in order for one sentence to land.
Yeah. Uh, it's interesting because I think as she was talking, I guess in this line of work, we're less like to have people with those like severely opposing values and beliefs, right, come to us. But of course, we don't know what they've been through to get to where they are to resonate and want to work with you. And actually, when I'm thinking about like the pub for me is a great social experiment because I had like as soon as you said no to be curious about the ones that you're not interested in, I'm like, oh God, yeah, I can see myself in interaction with them. I was like, no, not interested. Whereas everyone else, I'm like, tell me more. Like so it's a good place to experiment with that sort of thing. But with clients, I feel like there's only ever been one who, and I think I've been in the invitation talked about her before. She's a lot younger. She's like, I think she's 30 now. She was the one that the company asked me to work with. So she didn't come to me. And she clearly got some huge trauma that she just was not prepared to go there. And even in that kind of questioning, like the gates came, it's like, no, we are not going there.
And
I
that's
guess
so hard because she didn't choose to come. So she's already being made wrong. And I think that's the only place you can really work with somebody like that, is to stay with, they didn't actually even want to come here. And if you can hear that bit, then maybe something gets to soften, possibly not, but of just like they're being coerced into a space and they're being made to change when they don't want to, and you get to listen to those parts, because the bit that's actually going to change something, she has to move towards you to do that. You know, you can't, it's like women send their partners off for counseling. It's never going to work. Partner's just going to begrudge them and the counselor and the whole process. We have to come because we want to. And you can still work with her. It just, you would work with her differently.
We did have, like I said to the company, I was like, we need to have we need to connect time to see it. It's like, well, no, up front, I was like, let's see if we're even a good fit. And she actually got quite excited about working with me after meeting me. But still, I think there wasn't it wasn't her initiation, right? It was.
And you can transition that. So if you listen to a part of where she hasn't had the choice and how, but she'll be profoundly angry and upset about that, as any human would be, to be made to go and change, I think is like, shows the level of trauma in the business system. And if you can acknowledge that for her, she might then move towards you, because you can see what they're doing to her and how profoundly unjust that is and how that must feel to her. Because she's bumping up against trauma, where a system thinks they can just send someone off, get them fixed, and then accept them back in, kind of, as long as they look the way they want them to, which is like, yes, it understands very little about human beings. They're not robots. So you can work with somebody like that, but you just work with them slightly differently.
Yeah, and I think it's why I've not gone down that route, because I'm accepting money and more money from the company because I can charge them more, because they can pay me more. But the intention is not aligned, I don't feel. And therefore it just doesn't feel in integrity for me to take their money working for them, but actually with their best interests in heart. So
yeah, you would have to set that up very clearly to go, you're actually then not my client. I know you're paying, but the contract is you're not my client, they become my client. It's the only way it can work.
I did do that, but I left it open that we would still have this like conversation, but not about what was being discussed. But it just felt like it wasn't the best.
They're tricky. They really require so much for that person to feel you're not going to divulge something. You know, it's like children coming, that you're not going to then tell the parents what they've shared with you. It's the same thing. it has to be set up so tightly. It can be so complex. I think it could be profoundly useful, because imagine them going to most people as opposed to coming to somebody like you that has that capacity to understand the complexity of all of that, and to say to a business, this is going to take time, because I have to like do all of this work to establish a ground on which to work, because she hasn't made the decision.
Yeah.
It's possible to get there. We may find it's not. We may find after 6 months it's not possible, but you're going to actually have to invest in this person. And I don't know whether they're willing to do something like that.
No, because the investment in their mind is to get them to a certain level of performance, and that's just not what work is intended to do in like now. So, but I think I don't know that she was a rare case. I feel like it really did. It was a good experience for me to go, yeah, I could make more money quicker by going down this route, but it just does not feel aligned with what I want to be doing and how I want to be working.
And yeah, you absolutely. I will say no to people that I'm going to get a lot of money from. Somebody's wanted me to come in and do coaching for their coaches, or to provide a holding for them, and I've said no. And you get to choose, so that it's not just ethical, but it's actually what you want to do. You know, there's always a chance of doing everything ethically if we just need a lot more effort to do it and a lot more structures. But you know, that's a cost to us as well. We don't have to do that.
Yeah.
So that's the end of today, of our first module. Yeah, so as you say, you've got lots of places you can check in the curiosity what takes you away, because it's a continuum. We don't have it and not have it. There are places where we have a little bit more, a little bit less, and just notice, well, what's happening with that person, what's happening with yourself when it comes forward and when it doesn't.
Yeah, cool.
And yeah, come in with any questions, noticing, thoughts, yeah, into the box.
In the box now. Yeah. Awesome.
Perfect.
Cool.
It's lovely being with you this morning. And yes,
thank you.
going to connecting in the boxer.
Yeah, great.
Beautiful.
Thank you so much.
Bye for now, lovely.
Bye.